Release the Kraken!
This video is brought to you by Rocket Flip, an annoyingly addicting action clicker game that'll have you breaking your phone in no time. Head over to lameduckstudios.com and become an alpha tester today. Only available on Android. Good evening, everyone. This is Ron here at Lame Duck Studios, and here we are looking into Maya 2018. We're going to look at lights and shading. So go ahead and grab an object. Press R to scale it up, just so it's easy for me to see. Remember, my grid's probably bigger than yours in this case. So once we have the object, we're looking at this gray outline, right? So this is a shader. Of course, if I go into wireframe, we discussed that last video, you can see the wireframe. 5 brings up shaded, 6 brings up textured. Now shaders are pretty neat. If we come over to our attributes, go all the way to the end, there's a little arrow over here. Just tap that, grab this. We have our shader. So you can see this is the Lambert shader. Lambert 1 is always the default. You can't change it. So I can't modify the name or anything like that. What you should always be aware of when you're working inside of Maya is the default shader is always the default. Never mess with it. Don't ever change the color or any of that, because it'll just confuse you later on. You can't change its name, and it'll stick to other stuff. So let's say I make this red. Ooh, we're like, oh wow, I made this object red, cool. But because we modified the default, every object we make is now going to be red. Okay? So I would avoid changing this default one, because it's going to drive you nuts later on. You're going to be like, Mr. Flowers, how do we not have everything red? And I'll be like, did you change the default Lambert? And he'll be like, I don't know. Probably. You probably did. Okay. So the first thing you should do when dealing with shaders is create your own. Now you can create shaders in a few different ways. The quickest, of course, is right here under the rendering tab, and we have these 5 glorious shaders right here. First one, this is aniscopic. It's great for making stuff like glass, or you can use it for metal. Pretty much you can use any of these for those, but they have different shiny qualities. So the next one down, this is blend. I usually use blend for metal. This one I usually use for glass. The middle one is Lambert, which is what these have. A Lambert is a very flat shader. It has no reflectivity. It's really great for using when you're modeling on stuff and you just want to have a general idea of what it's going to look like, but not really the best for rendering. Although you can use it for concrete and that sort of thing, because concrete doesn't have a high reflectivity. But there are better shaders for that. The next one down, you can see this nice shiny plastic looking one. This one is our Phong. You can also use this for like glass or high gloss plastic, or anything that's really high gloss you can use that for. And then we have our Phong E, which is a little bit softer, and you can find various applications for that as well. And then of course we have these over here, but we're not going to really mess with these as much, so I'm going to leave these aside. And of course we have our lights. We're going to go over these in a minute, but we're going to stick to shaders just now. So if you want to apply a shader to an object, go ahead and pick it, and then click on your shader. So I'm going to make this one, aniscopic. Drop it on. You can see it is over here, it pops up. The first thing you should do to a new shader is give it a name. If you don't name it, you won't be able to find it. So let's go ahead and name it. I'm going to call this one, I'll set it red metal. Now I did what's called camel casing, which is the first letter is big and the middle letter for the next word is also big. Now true camel case does not do the first letter. They usually do lowercase and then middle. But I'm OCD and I like having the first one capital. You can also use underscore. So if I go over and I do underscore, that is totally legit. But you cannot use spaces because Maya uses a programming format, and variable names can't have spaces. So if I put a space in here and I hit enter, it's going to throw in an underscore because spaces are not allowed. Okay? So whatever you name it, just make sure you do. You can pick your color at this point. You can also add, if you have the aniscopic or a Phong, you'll have additional pieces like ambient color. So what is it going to reflect? So when light hits an object, it's not just a color. It is its color plus the colors of things that are around it that kind of get bounced and reabsorbed. So you can play with that. So I can add like maybe there's some blue in there, just a touch of blue. Okay. Incandescence, this is if the object is going to glow, and we'll see that in a minute. But I'm going to make this object glow very bright. Ooh. But I don't want it to be a white glow, because that's not going to be nice. I'm going to do a red glow. Grab my red. There we go. Dial that down just a bit. This would be off. This is on, right? Oops. I ended up changing it when I scrubbed, so let me go ahead and get that. Okay. And you can change your various other aspects of this, like diffuse. Translucence is your like transparency, essentially. But you have transparency up here as well. This could be like a balloon, right? Now you might be asking, how come when we're changing this we don't see it here? And this only seems to happen in the newer versions of Maya. Ever since they introduced Arnold, I've noticed that the materials don't change right away. So no big deal. I'm going to go ahead and right click on my material. If yours hasn't changed, it's fine. Go ahead and right click on, go ahead and right click on your object. Come down to assign. You have assign new, assign existing, and assign favorites. I'm going to go down to assign existing, and I'm just going to go ahead and grab it from there. If it doesn't change it to something else. I'll go back to Lambert, and then I'll go back to the new one. There we go. So it takes a second, but just be aware that that is a bit of a hacky thing. Hopefully the newer versions don't have that issue, but I noticed in 2018 that is a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the next object. I'm going to make this something else. And you can see this is nice and glowy, right? If I hit render, this little guy right here, you can see that's giving off light. Pretty cool. This one, let's make this something else. I'm going to go and grab, do just a regular Lambert. First thing we should do is name it. I'll call this blue concrete. You know, just because it's not going to be shiny. But I will make it blue. You won't be able to see through it. Is it going to have any ambient light? A little bit. I want this to have an ambient color of red, just because the red's going to be given off a little bit. So do that. I'll dial that down just a tad. Because this being right next to that will have a lot of the red shining onto it. And then the light bouncing from here, coming back, should give a little bit of blue, so they're right next to each other. Okay. Again, our material didn't change. I'm going to go ahead and right click on it. And just go ahead and swap it to something else, and then I'll swap it back. Go down to assign existing, and blue. Now you can see when I bring up that list, so right click, go down to assign existing, our materials are listed in here by name, right? So if I make a bunch of materials, if I go up here and I just start clicking and making a bunch of materials, I'll do this a bunch of times, and now I right click and I go into here, look at this. There's a whole bunch of materials in here, but I don't know which one's which, right? They're all labeled with a number. Which one is yeah, I don't know who you are, where you are, right? So make sure that you give names to your materials. Okay, so grab my blue concrete. This one I will make like a candy apple color, but I'm going to make it nice and green. You see this one updated right away. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Change this Fong out to green. I'll do glass. And I'll make this one slightly translucent or transparent. Now there's more stuff we can do to these. You can add additional specularity. You can make it really shiny. You can see the specularity color. I can change that out. Now this option is only available on ones that have gloss or reflectivity on there. But I can say, oh, I want this to reflect some blue. Okay, and the amount of reflection, make it a little bit higher. All right, and if I hit render, that's this guy right next to the eyeball. Ooh, fancy. Now we don't see these objects because there are no lights in our scene. This one gives off its own light. Okay. So let's go ahead and add some lights. And while we're at it, let's add a floor. So I'm going to go up to polygons. Let's go ahead and grab our flat plane here. Put that in the middle. I'm going to bring up my scale tool by hitting R. I'm going to drag that out to make a floor, nice and big. Now you can see that this floor is red because, does anybody remember? Yeah, because we left the default color red. So I'm going to go back into Lambert 1 over here on the attributes. And you can also get there by right-clicking and going down to material attributes, and it'll bring it up. Sometimes it doesn't bring it up right away. You might have to do it twice. But you can get it quickly by going into your attributes and clicking on the actual name. I'm going to change this back to that wonderful gray that was default. Hey, look at that. I'm going to grab this object, and you can see the grid is kind of messing up, so I'm going to end up disabling my grid for now. That's this right here on my viewport. And I'll move my objects so that they're not quite in the floor. And what's really good is if you go into a side view, so go down to my side view, again spacebar, hover your mouse over one of your viewports, go in. And I will just bring these up above the red line. Now my line is red because that's what I colored it. Yours might be a black line. If you want to change your grid, kind of like mine, you can go up to display, come down to grid, and there's a little options box in the corner. Open that up. And if you want yours to look like mine, just copy the numbers right here. So mine is 5, 12, 96, 32. This is scaled so I can work in Unreal, so it's more reasonable. Objects in Unreal are much larger than the default in Maya. And then if you want to change your axis color, right down here we have axis color, and you can pick whatever color you like. You actually can't pick the color, you have to do a scroll to pick your color. And then whatever you like, hit apply or apply and close, and so on. And you can actually color the lines in between as well if you like. Okay? And that will change your grid. Now my grid, of course, is off on my perspective view, but it is available on my other views. So that with that, I have my floor, I have my objects. Let's make some lights. Go up to rendering, and we have a whole bunch of lights. We also have some cameras and some other features here as well. The first light, this is our ambient light. This acts as a fill light. So if I hit 7 to turn lights on, you can see the only one giving off light is this one, because this one is incandescent. If I drag this fill light in, go ahead and click it, it'll drop it into the scene. And I'll move it up here so I can see it. Now scaling a light generally does nothing. You can see nothing happens. But you can move it and change its position. Now this light, because it fills the entire area, it does not matter where it's at. Okay? It evenly fills the entire room. And now if I were to render, you can see we have that. Now we're not getting a lot of detail because we're actually under the Arnold renderer, which is the new default in Maya. I'm going to go ahead and change this down to Maya software. You can do Maya hardware as well. This uses ray tracing, but I don't have ray tracing set up, so I'll just go to Maya software. Give it a second. If it doesn't re-render on its own, you can press the little clipboard over here, also known as a slate. You can click that, and it'll re-render. And now we have our scene lit. We can change the brightness of the light if I do the intensity over here. You can get to the attributes by, of course, going to the attributes. You can also get to these in the channel box. You have color, intensity, and you can see there's a ray trace. Use ray tracing on or off. Then I'll go back to the attributes. You can also dynamically change. You can actively change the light in here if you wanted to. They're all listed. But if I change the intensity, let's say 10, and then I render, yay! But this light is filling everything. So I'm going to drop this back down, maybe to 0.25, just to get a little bit of extra light in here. Go up to the next one. This is a directional light. So drag that in. A directional light casts light in from any direction or from a particular direction, I should say. I'll go ahead and scale this so you can see it. Now, scaling a directional light does not change the lighting quality, but it does change the widget so you can, or the object so you can see it better. Now you can see light is coming from this side, right? It's coming from over here. If I move this, nothing happens. Translating it does nothing. But if I change its direction, we get something, right? Because it's a directional light. So go to rotation, so press E. If I change the direction, I get the direction of the light. The light's coming from the bottom. Light's coming from the top. Light's coming from the side. Light's coming from the side at an angle. Ooh. And if I render, I get like this. Now we don't see shadows because shadows are currently off. We can go ahead and turn those on. Select your light. Come over to the, you can also come down where the shadows tab is. So either here or here. So go to shadows. I'm going to toggle on use depth for shadows. Don't change any of this just yet. You can if you want to. Resolution just gives you a sharper shadow. You can set a distance if you want, and you can filter the size or affect the bias. Or if you have fog in here, you can adjust that as well. If you're on the channel box, you have the option for doing depth with shadows or setting ray tracing on. Okay. Go back to the attributes. If I scroll all the way down in the attributes, you have the ray tracing option. Now you shouldn't have ray tracing and depth on at the same time. Ray tracing will always take priority. Just be aware of that. But with shadows on, if I render now, we have shadows. Hey. And if I turn ray tracing on, turn that off, turn ray tracing on, I also have to turn ray tracing on in my render stats. So if I come up to here, you can see we have our render boards, or our view, render, PBR. Right here with the little gear on it, that is our render settings. Come down to common, go into Maya software. That's what we're rendering with. So you can see that's the renderer we're using is Maya software. Scroll all the way down to ray tracing, open that up, and turn that on. When ray tracing is turned on, if I render, you can see we get this. And we actually get, because we have reflections and other various elements going on, ray tracing being very precise, we get that reflecting quality. Because I set like a blue reflection in here, we have that. And we get the light bounce as well. If I go up to this one's a area light, and turn that off. Or sorry, this one is a point light. A point light fills a small area. Get rid of this directional light. Come on you. There we go. It fills a small radius or a small section. So this is really good for using like a lamp. If you have like a little, make like a Luxo lamp or whatnot, you can use this inside there. It does have a light radius, so the light falls off at a distance, and you can see it's brighter over here, but then it gets darker as it goes over here. Now this, of course, is the shadow, but you can see from here to here, this is bright, this is darker. Okay. And of course, you can change the quality of that and set shadows and all that good stuff. Next one is a spotlight. Spotlights are pretty cool for doing various effects, but it does what you think it would. It creates a cone of light. Let me make this bigger so you can see it. And there's the cone of light. If we render, you got all that. Check it out. Now on a spotlight, this circle, the very edge of this is called the penumbra. Penumbra is controlled over in our stats here, our attributes. If I come down to the penumbra angle, this shows you how wide or narrow this angle is going to be. So if I adjust this, I can widen it up or narrow it down. And it also softens the edges. You see that? So if you don't want the light to be so sharp, okay? Now you can also adjust the cone angle. The cone angle is going to get you a very wide view. So cone angle right here is at 40. I'm going to go ahead and widen that up, and that gets us a really wide angle. And then I can take my penumbra and soften those edges in. And now if I render, I'll get this kind of result. Okay. Now what's weird is we got two lights going, right? So this light brightens this area, but this part is also in shadow. And because this light over here is bouncing, it's hitting this way. So I got two shadows going. If I make this light brighter, let's do like a 5, you'll see it's going to override a good portion of the shading from this light, because this light is brighter, so it's outdoing that one. Cool beans. Drop off. Drop off determines how quickly the light fades from the casting object. So if I bring this up, you can see very quickly the light falls away. And if I render, you can see from the spotlight we get this cast, and then the rest of it kind of dies away. Our area light, this is a big square one. Go ahead and get rid of the cone, and I'll get rid of the point light. Grab that area light again. Make this bigger. Now the area light does change based on size. So if I change the size of the area light, I get a different size of the effect. And it's a very rectangular light, and you can see down here how it's being cast. This little widget looks like a kite, right? It's got this flat piece, and then it has this little thing poking off. This is the direction that the light is going to be cast. Okay? You see everything back here? Nothing. But it's a very sharp light. And I can change the angle, of course. You can see that wonderful divide the light creates. These are really handy for creating like a TV. So if you want like a old television, you want to have it project light in one direction without having to worry about what's behind it. This is really good for that. Of course, you have your attributes, and you can also change the color of a light. So if I take this light, let's say I want this to be yellow. Now I have a yellow light. Render that out. Cool. Now this stippling is dependent on the renderer, so the higher the quality, the longer it's going to take, and you're going to get this weird preview, right? So graphics card and all that stuff make a difference. Also, if you use hardware versus software, you'll get a different result as well. So if I scan this with hardware, you can see the quality of the render is much sharper than if I use the software. So your various renderers will give you different results. If you turn gamma on and off, you'll see what the real result is. They always brighten it up a little bit. So when it actually renders out, it's going to be like this. So that is the basic rundown on the various lights and shaders in Maya. Hopefully you found this educational, and I shall see you next time. Hey guys, thanks for checking out my channel. Misty and I both thank you. If you enjoyed that video you just watched, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, check out my Patreon. I also have a Teespring store where you can get official Lame Duck Studios merch, hoodies and t-shirts and that sort of thing. Also, Rocket Flip is on its way out, is in alpha testing right now. Just a very, very simple action clicker game. It's pretty fun. You're welcome to head over to lameduckstudios.com and sign up to get access to that early. Help me test it and suggestions and whatever not that kind of go into the development process. I would make it a better game overall. My usual posting schedule is I create new content on Sundays and I release content on Wednesdays. With the summer kind of rolling out, I'm getting back into the usual schedule, so stay tuned and I shall see you next time.